Part of the joy of speedrunning lies in discovery. Sometimes you can try an idea, however silly sounding or unlikely it may feel, and happen upon a major discovery that restructures the entire run, shaving minutes upon minutes of time. This is one such story. A story about a discovery that allowed Silksong speedrunners to skip one of the game's most notorious bosses, trivialize difficult platforming sections, and even sequence break the very act structure of the game. To begin, we need to go way back. Let's take a little trip down memory lane, back to the deluded times before Silksong's release. February 14th, 2019. Team Cherry announces Hollow Knight Silksong. In that first trailer, you could see a short snippet of Hornet throwing out the Sting Shard tool, and then pogoing it for height. An ability practically tailor-made to make Hollow Knight speedrunners foam at the mouth in anticipation. Pogo skips are the very bedrock of Hollow Knight speedruns, after all. It turns out, though, at some point during the next 6 years of development, Team Cherry must have realized that giving the player infinite height was sure to shatter any attempt at Metroidvania-induced level design. Flash forward to the game's release, and all of the various tool pogos in the game had been removed. Throw out a boomerang and try to pogo it? Well, almost all of them. This is the story of the tool pogos they missed, how speedrunners found them, and how they were used to revolutionize Hollow Knight Silksong's various speedruns. I hope you enjoyed this one. Also, oh my gosh, 250,000 subscribers. You are all incredible. Thank you so much. To be able to do this and to have an audience is such a privilege, and I'm so sorry for not uploading any proper videos since the release of Silksong. This is the first one. There will be more coming soon, hopefully. Thank you. Silksong was an unprecedented event in speedrunning. About a week after the game's release, people had wrapped up their first playthroughs, and suddenly the collective minds of the already massive Hollow Knight speedrunning community, aided by hundreds of newer runners, all put their efforts towards mastering the game. Movement techniques, boss strategies, skips, and routing techniques started pouring in, as the sheer amount of runners, the rapid development of practice resources, and the carryover of Hollow Knight expertise made what would take other games years happen in only weeks. Speedrunners quickly took note of oversights in tool mechanics. Oh, what's that? The Delver's Drill gives height when you use it on certain bell walls, like the one outside the Father of the Flames room? Well, I didn't exactly say that every discovery was particularly useful. However, it turned out that the Delver's Drill could be used to pogo more than just awkwardly angled bell walls. On September 27th, only about 3 weeks after release, a runner by the name of Dark Koopatrol posted this in the Speedrun Discord.
I've tested every tool, aside from Curve Claw and Snare Setter, which I've lost access to, and the Volt Vessel's balls is the only one you can bounce off of, and only with Delver's Drill. This doesn't seem too useful for speedrunning, but I could be wrong.
And wrong they were indeed. They had found the game's first ever tool pogo. It turned out that if you threw the Volt Vessels in the bola form, the little balls had a hitbox that allowed the drill to gain height from them. Even better, you could also toss the Volt Vessels against a wall to split them back in your direction, allowing you to scale up the wall infinitely as long as you had tools to spare. Essentially, Dark Koopatrol's discovery had brought Kaizo Mario Shell Ricochet tech to Silksong. A runner by the name of Itrix chimed in with another cool discovery. As the tools in Silksong are largely manipulable by Hornet's Needle, you could throw a pair of Volt Vessels, run up to them, and upslash to launch one of them into the air. As the orb loses momentum when it's about to explode, you've now created an ephemeral pogo spot way up in the air. One that you barely have time to jump up and reach before it disappears. As this refreshes your double jump and dash ability mid-air, it drastically increases the vertical reach you have. Now things leaped into high gear. The 100% runners, who already had to pick up both the Volt Vessels and the Delver's Drill for completion percentage, started finding all sorts of skips. These skips had the potential to save minutes upon minutes of time, allowing you to skip Grohl's Gauntlet and Vilehaven in its entirety, this long drop into a long arena, into a long climb up for this Mask Shard in Farfields, and even skip the Hunter's March Void Arena in Act 3 through the Carmelita statue skip, which allows you to open the Farfields Bridge shortcut in Act 2, and then later in Act 3, just slip into Carmelita's domain right away without having to traverse this entire left part again. Due to being a Silksong reveal spot, the Carmelita statue skip was particularly difficult. As this spot is intended to be a Silksong, the camera move and the foliage obscure Hornet for a large duration of the skip, forcing the player to perform this through pure muscle memory. Which brings us to the narrative conclusion of this video. The most important skip to ever happen in Silksong history. That's right, Volt Vessel pogoing up to the Mr. Mushroom tablet. Yeah! Moss Druid, scream if you love Mr. Mushroom! As the early weeks passed, more Volt Vessel drill pogos were discovered. It was clear that this was a big deal, and that it had the potential to meaningfully shake up many of Silksong's most popular speedruns. But little did we know, we had only scratched the very surface. Sure, the drill works on the Volt Vessels, it also works on the memory shards, and particularly crazily, it also works on the conch cutters, resulting in some of the stupidest looking, unviable speedrun skips anyone has ever seen. Although, if you're very good at mini-golf, I encourage you to try some of these. As cool as some of these skips were though, they were only really viable for the 100% category. Going out of your way in, say, a true ending or an all bosses speedrun to route in both the Delver's Drill, which requires craft metal, as well as the Volt Vessels themselves, a giant pile of shell shards you're gonna need to afford to do the skips, another memory locket to activate another red tool slot. Point is, despite the skips saving immense time, especially the girl skip, the time sinks required to be able to perform the skip were too large. We were gonna need to find something better. Which brings us back to Dark Koopatrol's original Discord message.
I've tested every tool, aside from Curved Claw and Snare Setter, which I've lost access to.
What would be the odds that one of those two tools would end up being bounds more useful for this? Holy fuck! Let me explain the Snare Setter a bit, since I'd give a decent chance that you're not that familiar, and that just as I did, you picked it up in your casual playthrough, forgot it was an actual tool, and promptly turned it into the Caretaker to enter Act 3, never once equipping it in the process. Well, the Snare Setter works by rapidly propelling Hornet downward towards the ground, and then laying a seal of binding on the floor, that explodes for a large chunk of damage when an enemy steps upon it. On patches that aren't the very latest one, the Snare Setter also accelerates you infinitely, allowing for some really fast Snare Setter drops in tall vertical rooms. While that's cool, the important part is what happens if something comes across your path as you descend. That's right, the Snare Setter also works as a very shard-intensive mini pogo, one that's faster and more versatile than the Delver's Drill, and one that also happens to be a required item for most longer speedruns, given its place in the Silken Soul Wish. In Silksong's second most popular speedrun category, and my category of choice, True Ending, this created the perfect conditions for the Volt Vessel pogos to enter the route. But it didn't happen right away. But why not, I hear you ask? The skips were consistent enough to be reproduced regularly. In fact, the 100% runners were already going crazy with it. So why did it take True Ending speedrunners almost 3 more months to finally incorporate the Volt Vessel pogos? I present to you the two culprits, the Courier's Pill and Tip. Allow me to explain. These rascals quickly became a part of most long Silksong speedruns for a singular reason. Each unique courier delivery you perform for them gives you half a wish point and a good amount of rosaries, as well as being relatively quick to perform comparing to other wishes. This allowed us to replace a slower wish for the 17th wish point, while conveniently routing in the rosaries that we need for the Bell Heart donations anyway. Only problem is, the two donations that are really fast to do, namely Bone Bottom and Pilgrim's Rest, aren't guaranteed to appear. As there are 3 deliveries available, and only 2 slots in the offering menu, there's a 33% chance we get Songclaved, which would lose enough time to kill a run. Basically, let's say you perform the Bone Bottom delivery at first. Then, you return to the couriers to get your Pilgrim's Rest delivery, only to find that the couriers have restocked Bone Bottom and Zonclave. As you're only granted the half wish point per unique delivery, you're now either forced to tank the 2 minutes of time loss of doing Zonclave, or tank 1 minute of doing Bone Bottom again in order to subsequently take the exact same gamble. Basically, 2 hours into a 3-hour-long speedrun, you had a 33% RNG bomb that could kill your run. It sucked. Awesomely enough, this is a piece of feedback that the speedrunning community was able to relay directly to Team Cherry, with the suggestion that the couriers were changed so that they never restock the wish you just completed, allowing casual players and speedrunners alike to cycle through the deliveries without as many repeats. And awesomely enough, they actually took this feedback into account and patched the couriers. Which is why up until recently, we were running the category on the latest patch, where there was no RNG bomb 2 hours into the run. Sadly, in an ironic twist of fate, this new patch with the fixed couriers was also one where the Volt Vessel pogos were removed from the game. Ah well, you win some, you lose some. So, in a collective exercise of cope, us true-ending speedrunners buried our heads in the sand and pretended that the Volt Pogos didn't exist at all. No one wanted to run on the patch with the courier RNG after all. Eventually, someone was gonna open Pandora's box and we'd all have to switch back to that patch anyway to keep up, but for now, we could enjoy not getting Zonclaved. Until New Year's Eve, 2025. The day of the discovery of the Pimpillo Pogo. It turns out, while there were very few tools that could be pogoed directly, the threefold pin had a strange interaction with the Pimpillo bomb. If you toss out a Pimpillo and then throw the threefold pin or straight pin at it, the post-impact momentum-depleted waste of the pin briefly has a pogoable hitbox as it careens towards the ground. This is a layer of complexity above the Volt Vessel drill or snare pogos, as the secondary tool itself is not what's propelling you upward. This results in a technique that's exponentially harder than the others, because not only do you have to line up your positioning so that your pins hit the Pimpillo, but you also need to make sure that once the tools collide, you need to hit a very precise positioning window to line up the pogo onto the pin as it falls. The Pimpillo pogos had a very distinct advantage compared to the Volt Vessel pogos. Namely, it was doable on the very latest patch. It also had a pretty heavy drawback. It was way harder, and I mean way harder, than the Volt Vessel snare pogos. As the bounce arc of the depleted pins were largely inconsistent, this technique had the same problem as the conch cutters. It simply wasn't reliable enough in a run. For the Carmelita statue skip in particular, where a large portion of the inputs are performed blind, covered by this camera move and foreground foliage, things got really difficult. So difficult that it took runners hours to perform the Carmelita statue skip with the Pimpillo pogos on 25% game speed. So it just wasn't gonna happen. That's okay though, the Pimpillo pogos' destiny lied elsewhere. Because what could be a better motivator for enduring mild suffering than the prospect of extreme suffering as an alternative? That is to say, the idea of running with the Pimpillo pogos on the latest patch with the good couriers was so repulsive to all of the true ending runners that we all collectively ran back to the older patch. The discovery of the Pimpillo pogo had forced the runners to finally implement the Volt Vessel pogos. Now, with all of this history in place, how do you actually save time with a discovery like this? There's so many facets to consider. When in the actual run are you going to pick up the tools? How are you going to get the crap ton of shell shards you'll need to afford them? Where do you get the memory locket? Etc, etc. There's a lot of moving parts, and frankly it's pretty difficult to explain cleanly, but I'll do my very best. So, let's break this down, shall we? The three main Volt Vessel pogos in the true ending run are the following. Firstly, there's the Architect's Melody climb, the Groll skip, and the Carmelita statue skip. Let's break down how we made them fit in the run one by one, starting with the Architect's Melody. This one is pretty straightforward. Because we were already picking up the snare setter while getting the Hunter's Crest evolution, and we were already passing through the Memoriam at this point in the run to rescue Jubilana and visit the Pale Lake for the fleas later, it was incredibly easy to just slot in a trip for the Volt Vessels at this point. Because we were quitting out to the bench after getting the Volt Vessels, it also made it incredibly fast to pick up the huge flea while we were at it, which allowed us to cut out one of the slower fleas, like Mount Fay or Wormways. Now, the Memoriam also has another treasure. If you defeat the Rhino Grund that roams the lower floors, you're rewarded with a Beast Shard, which can be broken down for 140 shell shards. Because we'll be performing at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Volt Vessel Pogos, provided we get them all first try, we'll be burning through exactly 144 shell shards. Now, the Rhino Grund also happens to be a very annoying enemy to fight. It's very difficult to hit consistently, has a bunch of HP, and packs an absolute punch, especially considering the fact that we're on 5 masks. Thankfully, the runner Nebula found this really good setup to kill it consistently. By hitting it with the Needle Art as it spawns, doing a Silk Spear, and then quickly jumping into this Carinid, we can take 1 damage instead of 2 and get invincibility frames as the Rhino charges, pounces, or throws rocks at us. From here, all we need is another Silk Spear and 2 needle hits, and the Rhino Grund is dead. It's tricky, it falls apart easily, but is largely consistent. And it single-handedly solves most of our shell shard problems for the run. While we're here, let's move right a little bit. I mentioned we pass Memoriam at this point in the run to visit the Pale Lake in Putrefied Ducts. On the way there, we'll stop and unlock the Putrefied Ducts Bellway, which in the new route will be replacing the Bilewater Bellway. Just keep that in your mind for now. When we finish the entire trip, you can now equip the Snare Setter and the newly collected Volt Vessels and make your way towards the Architect's Puzzle. Here, we perform all 3 of the skips for a much faster climb to the top. Now for the Groll skip. This one's pretty messy because it requires a fundamental restructuring of the entire Sinner's Road and Bilewater segments, but I'll do my best to visualize it. So to start, here's what we used to do. Out of the Halfway Home segment, we would enter Sinner's Road, save the courier, and collect the Roach Guts wish from Benjin and Krull. Now we would do a full lap of the area, starting with going up, getting the 4 Roach Guts at the top, and then looping back down. But we would stop by Chakra, save the Green Prince, and go left for the 3 Roach Guts there. After getting those, we would run right, get the 3 Roach Guts there, climb up through Lugoli's shaft, and then turn in Roach Guts. From here, we would traverse the top section again, get the flea, and enter Bilewater, which we would traverse normally all the way up to Chakra. Because this is our final Chakra spot in the run, we would buy all the maps here. After that, we would drop down to the Bilewater Bellway and leave for Bellheart. A little bit later, we would return for the final trip, where we would climb all the way up to Bilehaven, finish the Trail's End wish, and then end with fighting Groll and picking up the Seeker's Soul. Until the discovery of the Groll skip, this was the fastest way to do things, even though there's a lot of running and backtracking through areas. Now, aside of the 3-ish minutes that you save from just not having to fight Groll or his gauntlet, the Groll skip allowed us to optimize this segment pretty heavily. It starts the exact same. Benched in Halfway Home, you enter Sinner's Road, save the courier, and accept the Roach Guts wish. Now once again, you climb up and get the 4 Roach Guts at the top. However, instead of looping back down for the lower ones, we make it straight to Bilewater, getting the flea on the way. It continues identical to the old one up until Chakra. Because we haven't seen her yet in Sinner's Road, we can't buy out all the maps, so we just run into her room and run right back out. Now we start climbing. We make our way through the tall vertical rooms, all the way up to where we perform the Groll skip. Because there are no benches in this area, we have to make sure to hit this first try, otherwise we run out of tools and the run is essentially ruined. Once you're at the top, you peek into Putrefied Ducts and open the shortcut. From here, you drop down, enter Bilehaven from the left and pick up the Seeker's Soul, without ever having to fight Groll. After quitting out back to Halfway Home, we do a quick loop of Lower Sinner's Road to tie up the loose ends, picking up the remaining 6 Roach Guts, going up through Lugoli's shaft and turning in the wish. We run into Chakra, buy out her map stock, and drop down to the Green Prince. Once we've saved him, we can quit out. Now we run over to Bellheart through Greymoor, getting this flea on the way. Now what this routing has done compared to the old one is save a sizable chunk of time by reducing the amount of repeated backtracking we have to do in Bilewater and Sinner's Road. Because as you might remember, in the Memoriam we unlocked the Putrefied Ducts Bellway. When we return to Bilewater one last time for Trail's End, we can simply travel there, drop down into Bilewater with a 6 Snare Setter drop, and be much closer to Trail's end, rather than slowly and painstakingly climbing all the way up from the Bilewater Bellway. Likewise in Sinner's Road, we've saved ourselves from doing this entire lap where we drop down to the bottom and then climb back up repeatedly, by splitting the roach guts into 2 trips. It's a little counterintuitive at first, but it actually ends up saving about 30 seconds. Hopefully at least some of that made sense. But what about the Carmelita statue skip? Now, this section is performed in between doing the first Bilewater trip and returning for Trail's End. It also happens to be the segment in the run where we perform the courier deliveries to Bone Bottom and Pilgrim's Rest, as detailed earlier. As such, there's a little bit of variance in which leg of the segment is performed first. Let's say we roll the Pilgrim's Rest delivery first. Firstly, we descend through the Belvane and gather silver bells. This is the other big RNG segment in the run, as each bell spawner has a 25% chance of dropping a silver one. Additionally, the non-silver bells have a chance to get stuck in the ceiling, disabling the spawner and forcing us to reload the room to enable it again, losing precious time. There are 8 silver bell spawners in the room, and over time we've found this very fast lap that hits 7 of 8 spawners really quickly. Unfortunately, you just have to do laps until you get the 8 silver bells required for the wish, while, I might add, carrying a courier delivery that breaks if you get hit 5 times. As we're trying to go as fast as possible, it's truly a recipe for disaster. Accidentally getting hit by randomly spawning firms or just bonking the walls too hard can cause the end of the run. Once the silver bells are collected though, you drop down through the lower Belvane exit and enter Hunter's March. Lucky for us, the map position of the Carmelita statue makes this the fastest path to do the Pilgrim's Rest delivery, essentially getting 2 birds with 1 stone and saving us the equivalent of time that it takes to do the trip into Hunter's March. Once you reach the statue, you perform the Carmelita statue skip and make your way to the bridge. After opening the Act 3 pathway, you drop down to Pilgrim's Rest and finish the delivery. Simple as that. If you're also curious about the Bone Bottom delivery, this one is a doozy as well. Depending on whether we do Pilgrim's Rest or Bone Bottom first, you could be doing the Silver Bells, the Skull Tyrant, and the Flint Beetles, all while carrying the Courier's Rasher to Bone Bottom. It's pretty much the Flower Crest from Hollow Knight all over again. Now, because you turn in the Snare Setter to enter Act 3, there aren't any more Volt Vessel skips in the run. But there's one major aspect of all of this I've yet to mention throughout this entire video. We've been using the red tools like a movement option. What about using them as intended, for combat? Now, aside from facilitating the most revolutionary route changes of Silksong speedrunning so far, the Volt Vessels also happen to be a really good tool. At 1 crafting kit, which is what we have at the end of the run, they deal about 25 damage per orb. Because there's 2 orbs per bola, and we can carry up to 6 Volt Vessels at a time, that is 300 damage. If we're diligent about picking up shell shards from the enemies we kill throughout the run, and take just the additional 6 to 7 seconds to route in one of the convenient shell shard bundles, we can dish out a free 300 plus damage on every boss in all of Act 3. This is also helped by the fact that tools used during the memory heart bosses are refunded upon leaving the memory, allowing us to hit Scarsinger Carmelita, Nihilith, and Verdania with Volt Vessel nukes for free. But how is this actually performed? Let's run through all of the bosses real quick. The Bell Leader, which is usually a really inconsistent and long fight, can be trivialized by just throwing all of the Volt Vessels on the second phase. This boss only has 800 health, so the Volt Vessels pretty much incinerate it. Next up is the 4 brothers Cygnus and Gron. Now, this fight was usually done in Act 2, because in Act 3, the enemies that Cygnus spawns become voided, resulting in a much more difficult and slower fight. However, because we can do this, and pretty much entirely skip the first phase, Cygnus doesn't have a chance to spawn any dock workers. Doing this fight now allows us to save the 10 seconds that it would take to backtrack through deep docks to the sauna. Alright, now for the big bosses, starting with Nihilith. In this fight, we can throw 6 Volt Vessels as she changes from her first to second phase. As Nihilith is unable to stagger in the first phase, she'll have a stagger queued up the second she removes the floor. So as soon as she starts the transition animation, we throw the 6 bolas against the wall, have all the orbs explode on her, and as the floor disappears, we do a wings and hit her with a needle, immediately stunning her. We've now removed about 400 HP from the boss, drastically shortening the much slower and harder to hit second phase of the fight, turning what used to be a clunky and terrifying segment into frankly a bit of a massacre, adding up to about 20 seconds of time save and a pretty large consistency boost for one of the game's most nerve-wracking segments. Then there's Scarsinger Carmelita. While passing through the Farfield's bench, we can also swap the Flea Brew for the thumbtacks that we collected from Benjen and Kroll during the Sinner's Road segment earlier. Because the first batch of tools you use after collecting them are free, and we'll be using them in 2 memory fights and then Lost Lace, we've got the tacks for free, adding another 144 damage to each fight. As we finish the mini gauntlet leading up to Carmelita, we can set up a pre-nuke consisting of 4 tacks on the ground and 6 Volt Vessels thrown. Timed just right, they explode just as Carmelita enters the arena and screams, resulting in about a fifth of her HP being dealt in damage before the fight even begins. Now for Lost Verdania, and this one's my favorite. A couple months after Silksong's release, we realized that fighting the Pale Stag for 5 orbs is much faster than running around and getting those orbs from the statues. The implementation of the Volt Vessels in particular made this even more so. But how do you throw Volt Vessels on a boss that constantly teleports randomly? Well, you don't. Because this arena happens to have a very tranquil and beautiful pool of water. And throwing a Volt Vessel into water does this. This zap deals about 75 damage to the Pale Stag in one go, and turns the worst Pale Stag teleport position into the best one. Before this, we would even take a second to push the lily pad leftward to the platform, so that the Pale Stag didn't spawn as far away. Now you can easily whittle down the Pale Stag in just a couple teleports if you get lucky. Whichever tools you have left from the Pale Stag fight, you can then use on Clover Dancers. The best way to Volt Vessel this fight is generally waiting until you get the screen wipe attack, and then throwing the Volt Vessels on the spot where the Green Prince is about to return to. Last but not least, we have Lost Lace. Compared to a lot of the other fights, she has a tiny hitbox, which makes her really hard to hit with the Volt Vessels. The generally safer strategy here is to just throw out all of the Volt Vessels when she does her 3 damage big attack in the second phase. Honestly, this isn't that good for damage because most of the Volt Vessels miss. There's also this greedier strategy, which takes advantage of her post-stagger respawn in phase 1. This one does insane damage when you hit it, but isn't that consistent because Lace has a chance to teleport to a number of spots. All in all though, using the Volt Vessels for combat probably shaves off another 2 minutes or so alone, adding up to about 8 to 10 minutes when you consider the skips as well. The discovery of the tool pogos allowed for the route that facilitated the category from going to about 3 hours and 10 minutes, all the way down way past the 3-hour mark to a 2:49, where the category's world record sits today. It remains to be seen whether any other tool pogo skips will be found in the future, but the ones that we did find are pretty cool. Except for you, Pimpilla Pogo. I hate you. Well, hello! It appears you got to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I just wanted to quickly apologize for the lack of real uploads since Silksong. Over the last couple of months, you might have noticed that I've really prioritized streaming, but I'm gonna try to get some more videos out for you soon because, listen, I know, this upload schedule is egregious. In the meanwhile, though, come along for the streams. I've been streaming Silksong speedruns most days since the game's release, and with Sea of Sorrow on the horizon, I think there's pretty exciting stuff to come. So, see you there, maybe. Thank you for watching. Bye!